What's up, dudes and dudes here? Now, my name's Scyushi and we're back to more Trove. Today, I wanted to make a different type of video to talk about the current state of Trove, because there's a couple things that I've been seeing rotating around within the community, and more particularly, there's been a lot of false narratives going on with this game in regards to where it's at right now and its future and so on and so forth. So I wanted to have this more as a rant video that also is putting things into perspective in case you've been away from Trove for quite some time, because the game has fundamentally gone through some pretty epic changes more recently. Now, to start off with, let's talk about the duping and cheaters and stuff like that. So, as far as my understanding, PC, it's mostly been resolved. We do still have a problem with bots where you'll see a single player running around in a world and like maybe 8 or 9 knights all teleporting to that player, hopping onto tank turtles and then mining ore. That's not really something that we can ever end up getting fixed, just because that's just like, you know, it's China gold farm bots, basically. It plagues every MMO, especially when it's free to play. But the bigger issue that a lot of people have been addressing and letting me know about is duping is still a very prevalent problem on consoles, more particularly on PlayStation. Xbox, it's okay. Switch, let's be real, there's not enough Switch players for it to even get that bad. That's kind of a joke. But PlayStation is still very much plagued by dupers, or rather, the duping from so long ago has still had its impact on the community even today. Because often, you know, during my live streams and stuff, I'll be talking about this item or that item actually being of good value on PC, and then you guys will be like, oh yeah, Gonda's like 10 flux on PlayStation or something like that. It's slowly getting under control, but it's still a problem. As far as my understanding, the duplication bug has been fixed, but the problem is that we've still got people that have stockpiled items, and there's still so many duplicated items in the rotation for consoles, because while ban waves are something that they can very easily manage on PC, it becomes a lot more difficult on console, especially when you consider that there's a very, very small part of the dev team that's tasked with managing the console versions of the game. Just as a prime example, we ended up having a Nintendo Switch update today, or well, it was a couple days ago actually, sorry. And apparently that ended up bringing the Switch 1 version of Trove up to par, but it still doesn't run on the Switch 2. So just to let that sink in, because as far as my last understanding, there was like maybe 1 or 2 people that were working on the console ports. So it's something that's definitely on the back burner, which I still kind of question, because I feel like they're probably still making a pretty decent amount of money off the console versions of the game, so I feel like they should put more tasks towards it. But anyway, more important than any of that, you know, it's just to say that the community is not like completely destroyed or dead, as some people are saying with their own weird narrative, because the duping on PC, again, is almost all taken care of. A lot of the old items that were way too cheap are now back up to being high value. But just keep in mind that on console, it's still kind of a problem. So just continually report people, whatever else. But more importantly, what has actually changed for the positive with Trove is 2 primary things. And for this, I need to reference the community letters. So for those of you that have been out of the loop for Trove for many years, more recently, the developers started having open communication with us. So they actually have people apply their questions in the Trove Discord, and then they end up having a community letter every month that answers those questions to the best of their abilities. Keeping in mind, they are still under, you know, they're still under a corporation that's controlling everything. So they can't like just be completely transparent with us. At the very least, the open communication has been great. And furthermore, earlier this year, long before that, they ended up having a Trove survey. And you guys might have remembered I covered it, but basically they talked about how the biggest thing that people were requesting within that server was stability to the game's lag and whatever else, and then also frame rate and performance, especially for those of you guys on console. So what they've been doing is 2 different things. One is that they have now dedicated considerable resources to having a couple people go through every VFX in the game, everything. Thousands upon thousands of VFX in this game that ultimately weren't layered properly, or just, for those of you that, never mind graphic design, let's just not get into any of that. But let's just say that the game valued flashiness over performance. And so now what they're doing is retroactively going through every single VFX, combing the entire game and cleaning all of those up, getting rid of layers of the VFX that doesn't matter, and so on and so forth. They're still in the process of doing that. We ended up having an update that fixed, I think, like Boomeranger and Shadowhunter and maybe a couple other class VFX. And it did have a performance increase. It was not the most notable, but it definitely made the game feel a little bit more stable, a little less like choppy at some points. Although the game performance still, it still crashes. I think a lot of that's just got to do with the memory leak that's still prevalent in this game, where the longer you play the game, sometimes the memory leak kicks in and it just basically has your memory of the console or game just leaking out of the side, which ultimately makes the game take more and more and more and more performance until you inevitably crash or just close the game and reopen it. But the most important thing that a lot of people are recognizing, and some people aren't, is the server stability. So I didn't even know this, but for years, Trove has actually been on cloud-based servers. Basically, your phone Wi-Fi was making Trove servers. So no wonder we were rubber banding and teleporting all over the place, and it's just been awful, right? Now, they have since migrated to the physical servers, and this is apparent on all versions of Trove, including consoles. I will say that while I've heard maybe from 10% of the community on my average of comments and so on and so forth, I've heard from maybe about 10% of you that there hasn't been any improvements. And I'm sure that that's either got to do with where you are in the world, or it might be a bigger issue in regards to Sony, because the most complaints that I've been hearing from you guys are people that are on PlayStation, and more particularly on PlayStation European servers. Now, I'm not saying that that doesn't mean there aren't still problems with people on Xbox or Switch, but generally speaking, the rest of the players have noticed it. And I can say with 100% confidence that if you ended up quitting Trove at any point because of how laggy it was, how much rubber banding there was and stuff like that, like I said, the game itself still suffers from some performance issues and will still crash sometimes, but the servers themselves have risen like the phoenix and been completely resurrected, in my opinion. Now is the time to get back on the Trove train if you hopped off for those reasons. Obviously, a lot of the game itself, its structure, how it's being developed, the pay-to-win content and all of that stuff, those core issues, as you might call them, haven't changed that much. But the fact is, the game is so functionally sound now that we ended up having the Sunfest event, which is being marketed as the 10-year anniversary for Trove. It is taking part over the entirety of July. I haven't rubber banded once. And that is unheard of when it comes to an event in Trove, because an event is usually when we have the most players. And lots of people slowly keep coming back to this game, and yet again, there hasn't been any issues. Now, the other huge positive to this, and I talked about this in my other video more recently that talked about the gunslinger in particular, is that with the server stability being more accurate, it means that projectiles and hit detection of enemies is also exceedingly more accurate, which means, again, I can confidently say this, you can now main any class that you want in Trove. I'm not saying every class is equal. I'm not saying that it's not more efficient to be a gunslinger over a boomeranger. But the fact remains that if you just absolutely love the gunslinger, for example, you can now main it all the way into the end of the game. And there are even reports that I'm getting from you guys about like, oh, this guy's a bard and he's handling the highest difficulty in the game. This guy's a gunslinger and he's just plowing through dungeons. And that is just an awesome thing to hear. Now, there's still problems with a lot of the classes. You know, Knight, I think, especially needs an overhaul because its current gameplay is just left click is the strongest attack. But beyond that, it's crazy to me to think that a class like Gunslinger, which we've unanimously dogged on for years because it ended up getting a rework that rebalanced a bunch of its numbers, but ultimately it didn't end up having that much of an impact on us. And the reason for that, I think, is because the developers were testing the Gunslinger's numbers on a developer server, a LAN server that didn't have the latency issues that we were all dealing with. But now that the servers are actually on a physical machine instead of cloud-based, the positives have just been so insane across the board. Almost every class in the game, I'm not going to say they've gotten stronger, but because of the consistency of the lag or internet or whatever you want to say for the servers, because the consistency of the hit detection, it feels like every class is stronger because it's calculating their damage properly now. And while I still would say Gunslinger needs a little bit of tweaking, generally speaking, as I've said, there are Gunslinger mains in this game, and that's perfectly acceptable. You can now just be whoever you want. So I don't know if there's anything else that I want to talk about in today's video. Most of all, this is just, I'm not even going to say that this is a video to get hype, because it's kind of just nerd stuff. It's kind of just a ranty video, but I just wanted to implore you that if you hopped on Trove for any of the reasons that we ended, or if you hopped off Trove for any of the reasons that we described here today, maybe now you want to end up getting back into it. I myself can admit that even though I've been playing this game for years and it's technically my job, I would kind of always just like hop on, you know, get my dailies or do a live stream or do a video and then just hop off for the day. But lately, because of the server changes, I've actually been addicted. I'm just doing the same grind that I've been doing for years. But generally speaking, because of the lack of rubber banding and lack of hit detection issues, I'm just having fun, man. I'm just vibing with this game more than I have been for a while. The more recent streams will attest to that, where I've actually been streaming Trove for like 2, 3, even 4 hours straight. Now, does that mean that the content is interesting or what's been going on with all of that stuff? That's neither here nor there. You know, that we'll have a whole other video to decipher all of that stuff and what the devs ended up talking about in their live stream and so on. This video is just to say, man, these servers are pretty cool and have made a pretty big difference. But anyway, thanks for watching. Smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want, support the channel, and have yourselves a wonderful day, ladies and gentlemen. Whether or not you end up deciding to come back to the game or not, or just, you know, hop on for a little bit or not, is entirely up to you. But I just wanted to clarify this because I have been seeing some people in the community kind of still pushing like, oh, the game's dying, or oh, the performance is ass. And it's like, you obviously are out of touch with regards to what's actually going on with this game. There's a very negative narrative, which I can say coats over the entire internet, not just related to Trove. And I'm kind of sick of it, you know? So I wanted to clear the air and be very, very transparent with you guys about what's actually going on with the game and just paint a realistic picture of where Trove is at right now.